General Hospital will reveal the nurses' ball of 2025 unfolded with its usual grandeur, flashing spotlights, glamorous gowns, and thunderous applause echoing through the halls of the Metro Court ballroom. But amidst the expected dazzle and charm, a gust of intrigue swept over Port Charles like a tempest cloaked in elegance. The audience, abuzz with anticipation, was silenced into a unified hush when Lucy Coe, the ever-dramatic mistress of ceremonies, took to the stage to announce the next performer as nothing more than a mysterious artist from the past. Murmurs rippled through the room. Who could it be? What legend had returned? And then, in a moment that would be replayed endlessly on social media and whispered about in hospital corridors for weeks, the spotlight landed on a lone figure stepping out from behind the curtain. It was Liesl. Draped in a sleek black evening gown that shimmered under the lights like a whisper of silk and shadow, she moved with unflinching poise. Her eyes, fierce and enigmatic, scanned the stunned crowd with the precision of a scalpel. The room erupted. Some stood in applause. Others gasped in disbelief. The woman who had once been feared for her ruthlessness and later revered for her sacrifices had returned. Liesl's presence at the ball wasn't just a theatrical twist, it was a seismic jolt to the emotional landscape of Port Charles. Her return wasn't announced. No press release had hinted at her appearance, and even those closest to her were blindsided. Though her performance, an operatic number laced with theatrical flair, was spectacular, it was only the overture to a much deeper and more complicated drama about to unfold. Liesl had not merely come to sing. She had come back into the lives of people who needed her in ways they didn't even realize. Among them was Nina, whose life had spiraled into a series of losses and revelations that left her emotionally wrecked. Liesl took time to speak with her niece in private, offering comfort and guidance. But her attention was particularly fixed on Willow, the young woman whose life she had once saved by offering her own bone marrow in a race against death. That act of medical heroism had forged a bond between them, one that neither time nor distance could weaken. Willow, once delicate and hesitant, had evolved into a woman of quiet resilience. She had faced leukemia, near-death experiences, and emotional heartbreak, and emerged with a soul that carried scars like medals. But Liesl saw something in her that others seemed to miss, an exhaustion masked by politeness, a compliance that felt too rehearsed. Drew, once the rock that kept Willow afloat, now cast a long shadow over her. His protectiveness had crossed an invisible line, warping into quiet control. It wasn't malicious, not overt, but Liesl could see the subtle cracks. Willow deferred too much, adjusted too often, smiled too politely. And to Liesl's practiced eye, that was a red flag she couldn't ignore. After a few brief yet telling interactions, Liesl decided it was time for honesty. She pulled Willow aside, not with malice, but with the care of someone who had watched a soul wander too far from itself. Her words were blunt, as always. She told Willow that her relationship with Drew, while born from comfort in crisis, had now become a cocoon that suffocated rather than protected. She pointed out how Willow's instincts were increasingly buried under Drew's well-meaning but overbearing influence, and how her own autonomy was being eroded without her even realizing it. Liesl's voice didn't tremble, it cut with surgical precision. Willow didn't respond right away. Her face flushed, not with anger, but with the uncomfortable stirrings of realization. She tried to dismiss the conversation, to mentally file it away as unwelcome interference. But the words haunted her. In the quiet of her own mind, she began to reevaluate her daily choices. Her silence during decisions Drew made on her behalf, her gradual retreat from making independent plans. Liesl had struck a nerve, and it pulsed more loudly with each passing day. Meanwhile, Drew sensed a shift. Willow's gaze became more distant. She started asking questions, small at first, but persistent. She delayed responses to his suggestions. She didn't cling as tightly as before. Drew, a man who had spent years rebuilding his life after unspeakable traumas, felt something precious slipping through his fingers. At first, he blamed the natural ebbs and flows of healing. But soon, the pieces fell into place. Willow had not drifted on her own. Someone had lit the fuse that dislodged her from the comfort of his embrace. When he confronted Willow indirectly, her replies were vague, but it was enough for him to identify the catalyst. Liesl. The woman who had re-entered their lives with a song and a smile was now, in Drew's eyes, a saboteur in disguise. He felt betrayed, not just because of her influence over Willow, but because he had once considered her an ally, a member of a makeshift family forged through loss and survival. Now, that family felt fractured. What began as frustration soon mutated into obsession. Drew couldn't let it go. He began quietly researching Liesl's past, unearthing her controversial history. Her time in German medical institutions, the gray zones in her professional ethics, the old accusations buried beneath her recent redemption arc. To the public, she had reformed. But Drew believed every redemption had limits, and Liesl's had expired the moment she inserted herself into his relationship with Willow. He didn't plan an immediate attack. No, Drew was strategic. He wanted to discredit her subtly, to raise questions in the right circles, to sow doubt in the very hospital halls that had once celebrated her as a savior. His goal wasn't just to sever the tie between Liesl and Willow, it was to ensure Liesl had no platform from which to challenge him again. His methods became colder, more calculating, and more detached from the man he used to be. Liesl, meanwhile, remained unaware of the campaign brewing behind her. She stayed in Port Charles longer than expected. Drawn into James' school performances, Nina's breakdowns, and the cautious rebuilding of a connection with Willow. She knew she had stirred something inside her niece. But she believed it was necessary, a painful truth given in love. What she didn't see were the whispers starting to circle around her name again. A nurse giving her side eye at General Hospital. A board member requesting an unusual audit of her medical records. An anonymous call made to a licensing agency. Drew was moving quietly, but effectively. And in a town like Port Charles. Reputation was currency, and revenge was a game best played in the shadows. In the weeks to come, the consequences of Liesl's intervention would ripple far beyond the nurse's ball. As Willow wrestled with her identity, Drew with his vendetta, and Liesl with the fallout of truth-telling. Port Charles once again found itself caught in the crosshairs of emotional warfare disguised as familial concern. Underneath the glitter and gowns, under the music and the smiles, lay a battlefield where every glance, every whisper, and every choice could ignite a new conflict. And the ball, they would all come to realize, had only just begun. Willow's initial response to Liesl's pointed words was confusion, even discomfort. She tried to laugh it off, to redirect the conversation with politeness and vague nods of agreement. As though Liesl's insight had missed the mark entirely. But in the days that followed, those words lingered in her mind like echoes bouncing off the walls of her conscience. They invaded her quiet moments, while brushing her hair, folding laundry, staring out the window while the coffee brewed. Liesl hadn't simply planted a seed of doubt. She had cracked open a vault Willow had long tried to keep sealed. A vault filled with questions she had deliberately avoided asking herself. The more Willow thought about it, the more she realized that her relationship with Drew had developed not in the fertile ground of romantic passion or emotional alignment, but in the scorched earth of her cancer recovery. He had been there when she had nothing left, not her health, not her confidence, not her sense of self. And in her darkest hours, Drew had held her hand, made decisions when she couldn't. Spoken for her when her voice trembled too much to rise. She had clung to him out of necessity, like a drowning woman clings to driftwood in a storm. But now, the storm had passed, or at least, she had begun to see land on the horizon, and the driftwood she once held so tightly now felt more like an anchor pulling her back into the depths. She began comparing how she felt now with Drew to how she used to feel with Michael. Michael, with all his flaws, had always encouraged her to think for herself, to speak up, to dream aloud. Their love had been forged in mutual respect and nurtured through shared struggles. There had been laughter with Michael, moments of spontaneous joy, debates where her voice mattered. With Drew, everything was calm, too calm. Predictable. Controlled. She realized she had begun to shrink herself to fit into the version of her that Drew expected. The version that always needed saving. These realizations didn't come all at once. They crept in, like sunrise creeping over the horizon, subtle and soft at first, then blinding. Willow started to reassert herself in small ways. Taking more initiative in parenting decisions, pushing back against Drew's opinions, voicing her own plans instead of waiting for consensus. They were tiny shifts, barely noticeable to an outsider, but Drew noticed immediately. His instincts, honed from years of survival and leadership, screamed at him that something was changing. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just adjusting to a new phase of recovery. Maybe she needed space. But when he caught her reading an old journal she'd kept during her time with Michael, when she hesitated before accepting his plans for their future, and when she began pulling away emotionally during moments of closeness, Drew's unease hardened into suspicion. And then, he saw her talking to Liesl again, warmly, intimately, and everything clicked into place. He hadn't initially seen Liesl as a threat. In fact, he had once admired her transformation, from villain to hero, from exile to savior. She had become a part of the family tapestry in her own strange way. But now, all he could see was a manipulator. A woman who had found a weakness in his carefully constructed world and used it to unravel him from the inside. In his mind, Liesl wasn't simply offering guidance. She was poisoning Willow against him. And the most infuriating part was that she was succeeding. Drew's anger simmered beneath his composed exterior. But it quickly became a roaring fire behind closed doors. He wasn't the type to explode, he wasn't impulsive like Sonny or reckless like Jason. His rage was colder, methodical. He didn't want to confront Liesl directly. That would be messy. Instead, he began quietly building a case against her, one piece at a time. He delved into her past with a surgeon's precision. He reached out to former colleagues in Europe under aliases. He traced her employment records at obscure medical clinics in Berlin, Zurich, and Vienna, hunting for any discrepancies, any black marks. He found whispers, allegations of unorthodox procedures, morally questionable experiments, disciplinary notes that had been buried by bureaucratic red tape. He found her connection to dubious pharmaceutical programs, times when her license had come dangerously close to being revoked. He compiled all of it in a locked digital file, coded and encrypted. His own secret weapon. He wasn't ready to use it, yet. But when the time came, when Liesl overstepped again or Willow slipped too far from his grasp, he would strike. And it would be devastating. He would tarnish Liesl's name beyond repair, in the eyes of the hospital, the community, and most of all, Willow. Meanwhile, Liesl, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her, continued to weave herself deeper into the lives of those she cared for. She spent long afternoons with James, helping with school projects, watching him ride his bike through the park. She sat with Nina over coffee, providing steady counsel as Nina attempted to piece her shattered world back together. And she checked in on Willow often, never pushing, just present. She saw the changes in Willow too and was quietly proud. Not because she had caused them, but because Willow was finally beginning to own her life again. To Liesl, this was redemption, not the dramatic kind sung about in arias or broadcast on hospital monitors, but the quiet, lived kind. The kind where you earned back your place not through grand gestures, but through consistency and truth. But Port Charles is a city where shadows stretch long and forgiveness rarely comes without consequence. Liesl may have returned with good intentions. But good intentions don't shield anyone from the daggers drawn in silence. The trap Drew was setting wasn't obvious, no sudden confrontation, no public accusation. Just quiet discreditation. Leaks to hospital administration. Anonymous complaints about her past. Untraceable emails sent to licensing boards. Drew had made up his mind. If he had to destroy Liesl to save his version of life with Willow, he would do it without hesitation. Liesl had become, in his mind, the enemy. And so, beneath the calm surface of family dinners and polite smiles, a cold war raged. Willow, slowly awakening to the life she deserved, stood at the center of a power struggle she didn't yet fully comprehend. Liesl, believing she was helping a young woman reclaim her independence, unknowingly painted a target on her own back. And Drew, the man who had once prided himself on integrity, was slipping into a darkness he had long vowed to avoid. In the end, the question wasn't whether Liesl would fall, it was whether Willow would see the trap being laid before it was too late. And whether Drew, once a beacon of strength, would recognize how much of himself he had already lost in his quest to keep her. Liesl's future now hangs in the balance in a perilous game of chess she has yet to realize she's a pawn in. Willow stands caught between two warring sides, on one hand, the woman who saved her life and sparked her awakening, and on the other, the man who stood by her when she nearly gave up all hope. Port Charles is entering a turbulent new chapter, where truth, loyalty, and vengeance intertwine in a maze with no clear exit. And as the lights of the nurses' ball begin to fade, a new kind of ball, darker, more dangerous, is quietly beginning behind the curtain.